200,000 years ago, a new species appears in Africa. Not kings, not warriors, just people. Homo sapiens. Us. What happens next is the most aggressive expansion any species has ever pulled off. Humans don't stay put. We move. Out of Africa, across Asia, into Australia, then Europe, and eventually we reach the last place left on Earth, the Americas. But here's where the story breaks. Because the moment you ask a simple question, everything gets complicated. Who was the first human to set foot in America? And how did they actually get here? For most of the last century, the answer seemed settled. People crossed from Siberia into Alaska on foot during the Ice Age. Sea levels were lower. A land bridge existed where the Bering Strait is today. But there was a problem. Once people reached Alaska, they were stuck. Two massive ice sheets covered Canada, no path south, no way through. So the theory said humans waited. They stood there for thousands of years until the ice melted. Only then could they move into the rest of North America. That opening, called the ice-free corridor, appears around 13,000 years ago. And right on cue, archaeologists found something that fit perfectly. Clovis points. Razor-sharp stone spearheads, grooved to lock onto spears. Powerful enough to take down mammoths. They were found all across North America. Same design, same time period. So the story became simple. Clovis people were the first Americans, and for decades, that's where it stayed, until one discovery quietly ruined it. Deep in the Yucatán Peninsula of Mexico, archaeologists entered a vast cave system. Tunnels, chambers the size of cathedrals, places no sunlight ever reaches. Underwater, they found human bones. That alone made no sense. People weren't washed in. The remains were too intact, too deliberate. Then they dated them. One skeleton stood out, a young woman in her 20s, about 4'7". Her bones were 13,500 years old. They called her Eva. That date matters more than anything else in this story, because Eva is older than Clovis, which means someone was already deep in the Americas before the ice-free corridor even existed. That forces a new question. How did Eva get there? The answer comes from the water itself. During the Ice Age, sea levels were up to 400 feet lower than today. The Yucatan caves weren't flooded, they were dry. People could walk inside them, carry their dead, move a quarter mile into darkness. Eva wasn't lost. She was placed there. Her body was undisturbed, carefully laid out. The evidence points to a ritual burial. And that matters, because it's the earliest sign of spirituality ever found in North America. People weren't just surviving, they were honoring their dead, which means Eva wasn't alone. She was part of a community. But archaeology had another problem. If people were already this far south 13,500 years ago, they had to arrive in North America much earlier. So scientists started looking for different evidence, not tools, not bones, dung. There's a fungus called Sporormiella. It grows in the dung of large grass-eating animals like mammoths and mastodons. More animals means more dung means more spores, and those spores last tens of thousands of years in the soil. When researchers sampled ancient lake beds, they saw something strange. Around 15,000 years ago, spore levels were high. That means lots of big animals. But starting around 14,800 years ago, the spores began to drop. By 13,500 years ago, they were gone. The animals were disappearing. Long before Clovis, which suggests humans were hunting them earlier than the Clovis timeline allows. Then came physical proof. In Washington state, a mastodon rib was discovered. Embedded inside it was a spear point, not a Clovis point, something more basic. CT scans showed it was man-made, a bone projectile. The rib was dated to 13,800 years ago. That's 800 years before Clovis appears. So now the picture is clear. People were in the Americas earlier. They were hunting large animals, and they weren't using Clovis technology yet. Which brings us back to the biggest question. How did they get in? If the land route was blocked by ice, there's only one option left: the coast. Along the Pacific edge of North America, the ice sheets didn't reach the shoreline. And running the length of that coast was something incredibly important. Kelp forests, dense, productive, packed with food. Fish, shellfish, marine mammals, edible kelp. One scientist called it a kelp highway. Instead of walking through frozen corridors, early humans could have paddled south in simple boats. Always at sea level, always near food, always in sight of land. Anthropologists once believed humans didn't develop boats or fishing until much later. But that never made sense. Coastlines are the richest environments on Earth. Ignoring them for 99% of human history makes no sense at all. The problem is evidence. When sea levels rose after the Ice Age, they swallowed the old coastline. Any camps, tools, or settlements are now underwater. But rivers tell the rest of the story. Coastal travelers would eventually encounter massive river systems. The Columbia, the Missouri, the Mississippi, natural highways leading straight into the continent. Which brings us to another skeleton. Discovered near the Columbia River in Washington state, buried over 8,500 years ago. Kennewick Man. From the moment he was found, controversy followed. Local tribes wanted him reburied. Scientists argued he was too important to study. For years, his bones sat locked away. When researchers finally examined him, the details were surprising. He was strong, muscular, built like someone who used spear throwers his entire life. He had survived brutal injuries, a spear embedded in his hip, broken ribs from what looks like close combat, and he lived another 20 years after that. Then came the isotope analysis. Chemical signals in his bones showed a marine-based diet. Not river fish, marine mammals, seals. That means Kennewick Man didn't grow up inland. He came from the coast, possibly as far north as Alaska. Later, he moved inland along the rivers. Physically, his skull didn't match modern Native Americans. It was long and narrow, similar to ancient coastal hunter-gatherers from Asia. Ava's skull showed the same shape. For a time, this led to a dangerous conclusion, that the first Americans were replaced by a later wave. But there was one test that could settle everything: DNA. For years, scientists thought Kennewick Man's DNA was too degraded. They were wrong. When geneticists finally sequenced his genome, the result was unambiguous. Kennewick Man is more closely related to modern Native Americans than to any other population on Earth. That changes everything. There weren't two separate peoples. There was one. Different lifestyles, different environments, different appearances over time, but one continuous lineage. Skulls change, faces change, diets change, genes don't lie. The first Americans didn't vanish. They became the people who are still here. Eva, the Clovis hunters, Kennewick Man. They are all part of the same story. And that story isn't just about where we came from. It's about who we are. Humans explore. We move toward the unknown. We follow coastlines, rivers, and horizons. And we're still doing it today, because the genes that push them forward are still inside us.